If you are like the vast majority of Americans, your most important criterion when buying beef is the price tag. Most of us consider this approach to be an expression of good stewardship of the money God has given us. However, the meat processing industry, in an effort to satisfy this desire for inexpensive food, has introduced practices that violate God's design for His creation. But God tells us to be good stewards of our bodies, the animals, and the earth He has entrusted to us. First, we'll take a look at how inexpensive beef is produced in ways contrary to God's design. Then we'll explore the natural, healthier alternative to these methods. And finally, I'll challenge you to examine your priorities by demonstrating that God intends us to be good stewards of more than just money. We really are what we eat. Cheap beef has a high cost. The beef industry's strategy for providing inexpensive meat is to produce it in mass quantities on a small amount of land. In these densely populated feedlots, cattle are fed cheap government-subsidized corn. So where's the beef in that? Michael Pollan, a leading expert on beef production, states, cows are designed to eat grass, not corn. The only reason we feed them corn is because corn is really cheap and it makes them fat quickly. Alan Trankel, a ruminant nutrition expert at Iowa State University, adds, some research indicates that a high corn diet results in the more harmful E. coli that are acid resistant. Corn is actually harmful to cattle. So, to keep them healthy, enough to be classified as not sick, they are stuffed full of antibiotics. In fact, according to the prestigious journal Scientific American, 4 million pounds of antibiotics are given to feedlot cattle every year. However, the cattle which leave the feedlot for the slaughterhouse are not healthy at all. 15 to 30% of all cattle which are slaughtered have abscessed livers, caused directly by corn consumption. It is evident that those who designed the feedlot system were answering the public's call for cheap food and disregarded God's design for cattle. In addition, the way these cattle are slaughtered puts those who eat beef at risk. Crowded together in feedlots, the cattle live in pens where manure accumulates and gets caked on their hides. At slaughterhouses, it becomes impossible to keep manure from getting into the meat. If even one cow species are infected with E. coli, an outbreak could result. And USDA research shows that over half of all corn-fed cattle have harmful E. coli in their feces. Since the average fast food hamburger contains meat from, quote, thousands of different cattle, ground up in that one hamburger patty, the odds increase exponentially that one of those animals was carrying a dangerous pathogen, says Eric Schlosser, another respected expert and author of Fast Food Nation. Feedlot cattle are also quite a bit fattier than grass-fed cows. I myself have witnessed the difference. When I would make hamburger patties for dinner with corn-fed ground beef, my hands would be caked with fat from the meat afterward. It required a great deal of scrubbing and scraping to get the fat off my hands. After watching the documentary Food Inc. and researching the subject further, my parents decided to switch our family to grass-fed beef. They didn't switch my chore, however. I still had to make the hamburger patties. But I immediately noticed a difference. The grass-fed meat left little to no residue. As evidenced by the high levels of fat and increased risk for E. coli, we are not being good stewards of God's creation. And consequently, we are harming ourselves and the cows. Raising a cattle in feedlots, according to the meat processing industry's way of doing things, has been costly. If we remain headed in this direction, we will pay a price. It is a cost to our health, a cost to the cattle, and a cost to our world when we step outside God's plan. Cheap beef is not cheap, after all. Now let's take a look at the benefits of the natural, healthy way to raise cows. Thriving in non-wasteful, God-designed pastures, the cattle feed on healthy grass, mowed by the cattle, and their manure is reused to fertilize the grass. The ecology goes around full circle. Because of their healthy diet, grass-fed cattle do not need to be injected with antibiotics. Also, grass-fed beef is healthier for us because it has a lower amount of total fat and is free of E. coli. In fact, you can, quote, put corn-fed beef on a grass diet for 5 days and they'll shed 80% of the E. coli in their gut, says Michael Pollan. A common concern raised against the idea of switching entirely to grass-fed beef is that there is simply not enough grass-fed beef to go around. The most effective solution to this problem is to eat less meat. The nutrition organization Eat Right America specifically recommends limiting one's meat intake to 1 serving of grass-fed beef per week. Furthermore, they describe commercial red meat as one of the 5 most harmful food habits. Let's keep that in mind the next time we buy meat at the grocery store. In an interview with grass-fed cattle rancher Gary Marquis, who sells his meat at farmers markets, I asked what the main difference between corn-fed and grass-fed beef is. He replied that grass-fed beef is not pumped full of steroids, which corn-fed cattle are given so they can be fattened and slaughtered sooner. Mr. Marquis allots anywhere from 10 to 12 acres per cow. This is a significant contrast to feedlots, where cattle do not even get 1/12 of an acre to themselves. Regarding cattle slaughter, Mr. Marquis explained that he sends his cattle to a small FDA-approved slaughterhouse in Los Baños. He receives them back unmixed with meat from any other cow. Compared with one of the 13 mega slaughterhouses, which butcher 400 cattle an hour, the Los Baños slaughterhouse butchers about 50 cows a day, a considerable difference, suggesting much higher and more humane standards. Even with the benefits of grass-fed beef, most people have a cow when they see the price tag. Corn-fed ground beef costs on average around $3.50 per pound at Safeway and Lucky's. Grass-fed ground beef, however, costs around $8.50 per pound at Whole Foods Market, but can be found at some farmers markets for $5 a pound. But Mr. Marquis told me that his customers do not mind the extra expense, not only because his beef tastes better than, say, a fast food hamburger, but also because, quote, people want cattle to be humanely raised. In light of what we have just learned, let us look at God's standards. Proverbs 12:10 says, "A righteous man regards the life of his animal." Crowding cows into pens, forcing corn down their throats when God designed them to eat grass, and consistently putting them at risk for disease, regardless of whether they're going to be slaughtered anyway, is not practicing good stewardship. We are not being good stewards of our bodies either. Corn-fed beef has the potential to be very harmful to our bodies, especially because of E. coli and its devastating effects. In 2007, 73,000 people were infected by the harmful strain of E. coli, which can be deadly, as in the case of Kevin. In 2001, 2.5-year-old Kevin Kowalczyk and his parents ate hamburgers at a fast food restaurant. Soon after, Kevin began experiencing bloody diarrhea and other ailments. Harmful E. coli was diagnosed as the source of his problems, but his kidneys had already begun to fail. 12 days later, Kevin died. As his mother, Mrs. Kowalczyk, tearfully put it, it was unbelievable that this could happen from eating food. God did not intend for food to make us sick. Tragedies such as this can be directly traced to man-made methods that do not reflect God's design. The food processing industry continues to introduce ineffective solutions to problems that are inherent to its flawed system. For example, after a rash of E. coli outbreaks a decade ago, the industry introduced the practice of dousing meat in the sterilizing agent ammonium hydroxide, instead of addressing the core problem of the feedlot system. Legislation, though, is not the answer. Changing our priorities is. We vote 3 times a day with what we choose to put into our bodies. Will we vote where our wallet is and only take into account the monetary cost of the food we are eating? Or will we consider all the factors, stewardship, health, and God's plan? Today, I have shown why corn-fed beef is a poor food choice, and why grass-fed beef, raised the way God intended, is the wiser choice. For more about this topic, the documentary Food Inc. is a valuable resource. Weighing the high price tag of healthy beef against the higher costs of poor health and poor stewardship, the choice becomes clear. When you shop, I challenge you to be a better steward of God's gifts to you by considering the long-term cost of your choices. After all, we can pay now or we can pay later. Thank you.